Some stories begin with thunder and lightning, with great events that shake the earth. But the truest stories, the ones worth telling, often start in the quietest moments, in the spaces between words, in the things we do not say. This is a story about a man who built walls so high he forgot there was a sky above them. It is about a woman who asked the only question that mattered. And it is about the slow, difficult courage it takes to let another person see who you really are. If you have ever loved and lost, if you have ever pushed someone away because staying felt too dangerous, if you have ever sat alone on a porch wondering if this is all there is, then perhaps this story is for you. It takes place in the Texas Hill Country, in the summer of 1887, when the land was wide and the nights were long and a man could ride for days without seeing another soul. But loneliness, as it turns out, travels faster than any horse. The auction yard smelled of dust and cattle, and the sour tang of men who had ridden far in the summer heat. Silas Cade stood at the payment table, his hat pulled low, signing his mark on the receipt while the auctioneer counted out his money. 3 heads sold, $47, enough to see him through another month. He pocketed the bills without counting them again. The auctioneer, a thick-necked man named Braddock, slid a tin of tobacco across the table. "Cade, you staying for the social widow Pearson's bringing her peach cobbler?" Silas shook his head. "Suit yourself." He turned from the table and walked toward his horse, keeping his eyes on the ground in front of him. The auction yard was crowded now, ranchers and farmers milling about, their voices rising and falling in the afternoon air. Someone laughed too loud. A child shrieked and ran past, chasing a dog between the wagons. Silas untied his horse, a gray mare named Dust, who had been with him longer than any living creature. She nickered softly as he checked her cinch. "Mr. Cade." The voice was young, hopeful. He knew without turning who it belonged to. "Mr. Cade, the church social is this Saturday evening, and I was wondering." He turned just enough to tip his hat. The widow, what was her name? Patterson Peterson, stood 3 feet away, her hands clasped in front of her, her cheeks flushed pink beneath her bonnet. "Ma'am," he swung into the saddle. Her face fell. "I only thought, have a good afternoon." He touched his heels to Dust's flanks and rode out of the yard without looking back. The widow's voice faded behind him, lost in the noise of the crowd. The road home stretched east, a pale ribbon of dirt cutting through the brown grass. Silas let Dust set her own pace, her hooves raising small clouds that settled on his boots and trousers. The sun sat heavy on his shoulders, pressing down like a hand. He passed the Miller place, where children played in the yard and a woman hung washing on a line. He passed the creek where he used to bring. He stopped that thought before it could take root. The cabin appeared over the next rise, small and square and alone. He had built it himself, 8 years ago, when the land was new and his hands were soft, and he still believed that a man could outrun his past if he rode far enough. He dismounted at the corral, unsaddled Dust, and rubbed her down with a handful of dry grass. She pressed her nose against his chest, and he stood there for a moment longer than necessary, his hand on her neck, feeling the steady rhythm of her breathing. Then he went inside. The cabin was dark and cool, the air thick with the smell of cold ash and something else, the particular mustiness of a place where only one person lived. He set his saddlebags on the table, hung his hat on the peg by the door, and stood in the center of the single room, listening to the silence. One plate sat drying on the rack by the basin. One cup hung from the hook above the stove. One chair waited by the window, its seat worn smooth by the shape of him. He should eat. He was not hungry. He should light the lamp. He did not. Instead, he walked back outside and sat on the porch, watching the sun drop toward the hills. The sky turned orange, then pink, then the color of a bruise. Crickets began their evening song, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. Silas sat until the stars came out. Then he went inside. lay down on his bed without removing his boots, and closed his eyes. Sleep came eventually. It always did, but it never stayed long, and it never brought peace. The next auction was a week later. Silas arrived early, before the crowd gathered, while the holding pens were still being filled, and the auctioneer's platform stood empty. He tied Dust to the far fence, away from the other horses, and leaned against the rail to wait. He had 2 heifers to sell today. Good stock, well fed. They would bring a fair price. The yard filled slowly. Ranchers drifted in from the surrounding country, their boots thick with dust, their faces lined by sun and wind. The women came too, wives and daughters, and the occasional widow, their dresses bright spots of color against the weathered wood and brown earth. Silas watched them all from his place by the fence. He knew most of their names. He had spoken to almost none of them in years. The auctioneer's platform creaked, and he looked up. A woman climbed the steps, her back straight, her movements unhurried. She wore a plain brown dress, the kind made for work rather than show, and her dark hair was pinned up beneath a simple bonnet. In her arms, she carried a leather-bound ledger. Clara Hope. He knew her, the way everyone in the county knew everyone else by sight, by name, by the stories that followed them like shadows. Her father had run this auction for 30 years before the fever took him 2 winters back. Now she ran it alone. Some men resented her for it. A woman, handling money, calling prices, telling them what their cattle were worth. But her numbers were fair, and her word was good, and the auction had not missed a single week since she took over. Silas watched her set the ledger on the wooden stand, watched her pull the gavel from her pocket, her father's gavel, the one with his initials carved into the handle. She looked out over the yard, her eyes moving from face to face, taking stock. Her gaze reached him, stopped. She did not wave, did not smile, did not look away. She simply looked at him, the way a person looks at a fence that needs mending, like she was measuring the work. Silas felt something shift in his chest, a loosening, a tightening. He could not tell which. Then she looked away, raised the gavel, and called the auction to order. 2 hours later, his heifers sold for $53, 6 more than he had expected. He collected his money, signed the receipt, and walked toward Dust. He was untying the reins when he felt it again. Eyes on his back, he turned. Clara stood at the edge of the platform, the ledger tucked under her arm. The crowd milled around her, ranchers settling accounts, wives gossiping in small clusters. But she was looking at him. He waited for her to wave, to call out some pleasantry, to do what the others always did. She did not. She simply nodded. Once, slow and deliberate. Then she turned away and went back to her work. Silas mounted Dust and rode out of the yard. The road stretched before him, pale and empty, the same road he had ridden 1,000 times. But this time, halfway to the bend, he looked over his shoulder. She was still there, a small figure on the platform. Her face turned in his direction. He faced forward and rode onward, but the feeling in his chest did not go away, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Silas Cade did not know what to make of it. I wonder where you're reading from today. If you have a moment, share your hometown or the place you call home. As the old folks say, stories are better when shared among friends. The sun pressed hard on the auction yard, heat shimmering off the wooden rails in waves that made the far fence look like it was breathing. Clara wiped her palm on her skirt before gripping the gavel again. Sold. $32 to Mr. Harlan. She marked the ledger, her pen scratching quick and sure. The numbers steadied her. They always had. Numbers did not lie, did not promise things they could not deliver, did not ride away before you could finish a sentence. The crowd shifted, boots scraping on packed dirt. Clara looked up. He was there again. Silas Cade, leaning against the far fence, his hat pulled low, his arms crossed over his chest. Same spot as last week. Same distance. Far enough to watch. Close enough to hear. Never close enough to be reached. She had watched him for 2 years now. Every auction, without fail. He sold his cattle, collected his money, and disappeared before the dust settled. The women tried Lord. How they tried. Widow Pearson with her peach cobbler. The Miller girl with her ribbons and her laughter. Even old Mrs. Braddock had attempted to seat him next to her niece at the church social last spring. He refused them all. Politely, firmly, completely. Clara called the next lot, a pair of oxen, strong and well-matched. The bidding rose, fell, rose again. Her voice carried across the yard without strain, the way her father had taught her. Keep your pitch steady, Clara girl. Let the numbers do the work. She missed him. 2 winters gone, and some mornings she still expected to see him at the breakfast table, his coffee black, his ledger open, his pencil moving in that careful way of his. The oxen sold. She marked the price. When she looked up again, Silas was untying his horse. The gray mare Dust, she had heard someone call her, stood patient while he checked the cinch. His hands moved with the certainty of a man who had done this 1,000 times. No wasted motion, no hesitation. He swung into the saddle. Clara set down her gavel. She did not know why she did it, why she stepped to the edge of the platform, why she let her voice carry across the yard. That one's leaving early again, folks. A few heads turned. Someone chuckled. Silas went still in the saddle. Their eyes met. 40 feet of dust and heat and strangers between them. Clara did not smile, did not wave. She simply looked at him the way her father used to look at a man who owed money direct, patient, unwilling to be the first to look away. Silas held her gaze for 3 heartbeats. Then he touched his heels to the mare's flanks and rode out, but slower than usual. Clara noticed. She picked up her gavel, called the next lot, and did not look at the road again. But when the auction ended and the crowd thinned and the shadows stretched long across the empty yard, she stood on the platform alone, her father's gavel in her hand, and wondered what it was about Silas Cade that made a woman want to ask questions she had no business asking, and why. After 2 years of watching him leave, she suddenly wanted to know what would happen if she followed. The calf pulled against the lead rope, its hooves scrabbling on the dry ground. Clara kept her grip firm, her arm steady, as she guided the animal through Silas Cade's gate. He stood on his porch, watching her approach. His shirt was dark with sweat at the collar, his sleeves rolled to the elbow. He had been working. She could see the fresh-turned earth near the barn, the shovel still stuck in the ground. Clara stopped 10 feet from the porch steps. The calf bawled once, then went quiet. Mr. Cade. He did not move from where he stood. Miss Hope. This one turned up in my holding pen yesterday. Your brand. She held out the rope. He came down the steps slowly, his boots heavy on the wood, and took it from her. Their fingers did not touch. Obliged. He led the calf toward the corral, his back to her. Clara should have mounted her mare, should have ridden out the way she came. Business done. Nothing more to say. She did not move. The corral gate creaked as he opened it, pushed the calf inside, latched it shut. He turned back to face her, the rope coiled in his hands. Something else. The words came out harder than she expected, direct, almost sharp. Clara felt her mare shift beneath her, the leather of the saddle creaking. The sun pressed against her shoulders. Somewhere behind the barn, a mockingbird sang 3 notes and stopped. You come to every auction. Silas said nothing. Every week, 2 years now, you sell your cattle, you collect your money, and you leave before anyone can say more than 2 words to you. He wrapped the rope around his fist, unwrapped it. His jaw tightened. That's my business. It is. Clara gathered her reins, felt the leather warm and rough against her palms. I just wonder about a man who shows up every week but won't stay. A man who refuses every invitation, every kindness, every outstretched hand in the county. His eyes met hers, dark, steady, giving nothing. Wonder all you want, Miss Hope. She should stop. She knew she should stop. This was not her place, not her concern. Not her, are you running from something, Mr. Cade, or running from someone? The words hung in the air between them. The mockingbird started again, its song bright and careless. Silas's hand stopped moving on the rope. Neither. Clara tilted her head, studied him the way she studied a column of numbers that did not add up. Running from yourself is the hardest kind. Something shifted in his face. A flicker. A crack in the stone. She turned her mare toward the gate. The animal moved easily, eager to be gone from this quiet place. Clara did not look back, did not wait for a response. Her spine stayed straight, her hands steady on the reins. She was past the fence line when his voice reached her. Miss Hope. She stopped, did not turn. Silence. Long enough for the mockingbird to finish its song. Long enough for her heart to beat 4 times against her ribs. Then, quieter. How do you know? Clara looked over her shoulder. Silas stood where she had left him, the rope forgotten in his hands, his face stripped of the careful blankness he wore like armor. She held his gaze. Because I used to run too. She rode out before he could ask what she meant. But halfway down the road, her hands began to shake, and she realized she had just said aloud something she had never told another living soul. The crack split the morning air like a rifle shot. Silas straightened from the fence post he was setting, his hands still wrapped around the post hole digger. The sound had come from the east road, sharp and unmistakable wood giving way under strain. He waited, listened. A horse whinnied, then a woman's voice, too distant to make out the words but clear enough in its frustration. Silas pulled his gloves off and walked toward the road. The wagon sat tilted at the bend, its rear wheel cracked clean through. 3 spokes shattered and the iron rim twisted into the dirt. The horse, a bay mare with a braided mane, stamped and pulled against the traces, eyes rolling white. Clara Hope stood beside the wreck, her hand on the mare's neck, speaking low and steady to calm the animal. She looked up as Silas approached. Mr. Cade. He stopped at the edge of the road, taking in the damage. The wheel was beyond simple repair. She would need a new spoke at minimum, maybe 2, and someone to reset the rim. That wheel's done. I noticed. Her voice was dry, but there was no anger in it. She kept her hand on the mare's neck, her fingers moving in slow circles. Silas looked at the wagon bed, sacks of feed, a crate of supplies, the auction ledger wrapped in oilcloth. How far were you going? Miller's place, delivering feed they bought last week. That was 6 miles west. She would not make it on foot. Not with this load. He should offer directions to the nearest wheelwright. Should tip his hat and ride on. Should, I've got oak in my barn. Can make a spoke that'll hold. The words came out before he could stop them. Clara's hand stilled on the mare's neck. She looked at him, her eyes searching his face for something he could not name. That's kind of you, Mr. Cade. It's practical. You're blocking the road. She almost smiled. Almost. They unhitched the mare together. Clara held the traces while Silas worked the buckles, his fingers brushing against leather worn smooth by years of use. The mare calmed under their steady hands, her breathing slowing, her ears relaxing forward. She's well trained, Silas said. My father broke her himself. Said a good horse was worth more than a good man. Most days. Silas led the mare toward his barn while Clara walked beside the crippled wagon, one hand trailing along the sideboard. He could feel her eyes on his back. but he did not turn. Inside the barn, he set the mare in an empty stall and forked hay into the manger. Clara appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright morning light. "Your tools." He pointed to the workbench along the far wall. She walked to it without hesitation, running her fingers over the planes and chisels and spoke shaves arranged in careful rows. "You keep them sharp. Dull tools make bad work." She handed him the spoke shave, and he took it, their fingers brushing for half a second. Her hand was calloused, the nails cut short and practical. He turned away and began to work. The oak plank was good stock, aged and dry, the grain running straight and true. Silas measured twice, marked his cuts, and began to shape the spoke. Shavings curled away from the blade and fell to the floor in pale ribbons. Clara did not speak. She did not fill the silence with chatter or questions or the nervous laughter that most women offered when they found themselves alone with him. She simply stood near the workbench, handing him tools when he needed them, holding the wood steady when he asked. Her presence as calm and unremarkable as the barn cat sleeping in the corner. An hour passed, maybe more. Silas fitted the new spoke into the hub, tested the join, nodded once. "That'll hold. You do good work." He wiped his hands on a rag, not looking at her. "My father used to say a man who fixes things right the first time is worth 10 who talk about fixing things. Your father sounds like he had opinions." "Had a few." Silas tossed the rag onto the workbench, kept most of them to himself. Clara picked up the finished spoke, turning it in her hands. The oak gleamed pale in the dusty light. "I should pay you for this." "No need." "Then coffee, unless you're in a hurry to get back to all that quiet." He looked at her then. Really looked. Her face was calm, her eyes steady, her mouth set in a line that was neither smile nor frown. She was not asking for anything. She was simply offering. Silas felt something loosen in his chest. A knot he had not known was there. "Coffee's in the cabin." They walked out of the barn together, the spoke still in Clara's hands. The sun had climbed high, burning off the morning cool. Somewhere in the pasture, a meadowlark sang. The cabin door creaked when he opened it. The interior was dim after the brightness outside, the air cool and still. Clara stood in the doorway, her eyes moving over the single room, the narrow bed against the wall, the cold stove, the one chair by the window. She did not comment on any of it. Silas busied himself with the coffee. Water from the pump, grounds from the tin on the shelf. The pot settled onto the stove with a familiar clang. "You can sit." "Where?" He turned. She was right. There was only one chair. Porch. They carried their cups outside and stood at the rail, 6 feet apart, watching the light change over the hills. The coffee was strong and bitter, the way he always made it. Clara drank without complaint. "This is good land." "It serves. You've been here long." 8 years. She nodded slowly, her cup held in both hands. Steam rose between her fingers. "Alone." The word landed like a stone in still water. Silas stared at the horizon. The hills rolled away in shades of brown and gold, the grass dry and waiting for rain that might never come. Not always. Clara was quiet. She did not push, did not pry, did not ask the questions that pressed against his chest like a weight. She simply stood beside him, drinking her coffee, letting the silence stretch. The sun moved. Shadows lengthened. The meadowlark stopped singing. "I should fix that wheel before dark," Silas said. "I can help. You know wagon work." Clara set her cup on the rail. "My daddy used to say a woman who can't mend a fence can't mend much else." She walked toward the barn without waiting for his response. Silas stood on the porch, his empty cup growing cold in his hands, and watched her go. Her stride was sure, her back straight, her shadow stretching long across the dirt. He had lived alone for 8 years, had wanted it that way, had needed it. But standing there in the late afternoon light, watching Clara Hope walk into his barn like she belonged there, Silas realized that the silence he had built around himself was not as solid as he thought. And for the first time since the fever took everything he loved, he was not certain he wanted it to be. The fence post went into the ground with a solid thunk. Silas stepped back, wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, and reached for the next post. Clara was already holding it out to him. She had arrived at first light, her wagon loaded with wire and staples and tools he had not asked for. He had stood on the porch with his coffee, watching her unload, and said nothing. She had not waited for permission. That was 3 hours ago. Now the sun hung high and hot, and they had set 14 posts along the south fence line. Silas drove the post-hole digger into the earth while Clara held the cedar steady, her gloves dark with sweat and dirt. Neither of them had spoken in nearly an hour. The silence should have been uncomfortable. It was not. Clara worked the way his father had worked, steady. Sure, no wasted motion. She knew when to hold and when to step back, when to hand him a tool and when to let him reach for it himself. Silas tamped the dirt around the post, tested it with his weight. Solid. Water. Clara pulled the canteen from her belt and handed it to him. He drank deep, the water warm but clean, and passed it back. She drank too, her throat moving, a trickle escaping down her chin. She wiped it away with her sleeve and did not apologize. They moved to the next post. The land rose gently here, climbing toward the oak tree on the ridge. Silas could see the 2 limestone markers beneath its branches, pale against the brown grass. He had carved them himself, 8 winters ago, his hands blistered and bleeding in the cold. Clara followed his gaze. She did not ask. They set 3 more posts. The sun moved. Shadows shifted. Silas's shoulders ached. His palms were raw beneath his gloves. He welcomed the pain. It was simple. Clean. A problem with a solution. Your father taught you this. Clara drove a staple into the post with 3 clean strikes. He taught me everything. Said a ranch doesn't care if you're a man or a woman. It only cares if you show up. He sounds like he knew what he was about. He did. She reached for another staple. After my mother passed, it was just the 2 of us. I was 12, too young to run a ranch, too stubborn to let anyone else do it. Silas stretched the wire tight while she hammered. The barbs caught the light, sharp and bright. When did he pass? 2 winters back. Fever took him in 3 days. She did not stop working. I buried him myself. Ground was frozen solid. Took me 2 days to dig deep enough. The words landed in the space between them, plain and unadorned. No self-pity, no plea for sympathy, just fact. Silas understood that kind of grief, the kind you carried in your hands and your back and the blisters on your palms. They finished the wire and moved to the next section. The oak tree was closer now. Silas could see the wildflowers growing around the markers, columbine and sage, planted 3 springs ago when he finally found the strength to make the graves something other than wounds in the earth. Clara looked at the tree, then at him. Your wife. The question should have made him flinch. It did not. And my daughter. Clara drove another staple. The hammer rang against the metal. The fever. Winter of 79. She nodded slowly. Did not say she was sorry. Did not offer comfort or platitudes or the soft words that other people seemed to think would help. That's hard ground to walk on. Silas tested the tension on the wire. His voice came out rough. Gets easier some days. Some days is enough. They worked in silence for a long time after that. The fence line stretched out behind them, straight and true, the wire catching the afternoon light. Silas's hands had found a rhythm with Clara's reach. Hold, hammer, move, no words needed. He had forgotten what it felt like to work beside another person, to share a task without having to explain every step, to trust someone to know what needed doing without being told. The sun began its slow slide toward the hills. The air cooled. The shadows of the posts stretched long across the grass. Clara set down her hammer and straightened, pressing her hands against the small of her back. We should stop soon. Lights going. Silas looked at the fence. 3 more posts and they would reach the property line. I can finish tomorrow. I'll come back. It was not a question. Silas pulled off his gloves and slapped them against his thigh, raising a small cloud of dust. He should tell her no, should say he could manage on his own, should put the distance back between them before obliged. The word came out before he could stop it. Clara gathered her tools, her movements unhurried. She loaded them into the wagon, checked the mare's harness, and climbed onto the seat. Mr. Cade? He looked up. She held the reins loosely in her hands, her face calm in the fading light. My brother died that same winter. The fever took him too. Silas went still. I was 18. He was 22. Strong as an ox. My father used to say. She gathered the reins tighter. He was gone in 2 days. I sat with him until the end. The air between them felt different now. Charged. Heavy. Why are you telling me this? Clara looked at him for a long moment. Because I know what it costs to dig a grave in frozen ground. She clicked her tongue, and the mare moved forward. The wagon creaked down the road, raising dust that hung golden in the slanted light. Silas stood at the fence line and watched her go. The oak tree threw its shadow across the graves, and the wildflowers swayed in the evening breeze, and somewhere in the distance a whippoorwill began its lonesome call. He looked at his hands, the calluses, the dirt beneath his nails, the small cut on his palm where the wire had caught him. Clara's hands looked the same. He turned and walked toward the cabin, his boots heavy on the dry grass. The fence stretched behind him, half finished, waiting for tomorrow. For the first time in 8 years, tomorrow felt like something other than just another day to survive, and that terrified him more than anything had in a very long time. The general store smelled of tobacco and pickle brine and the sharp tang of kerosene. Silas set his flour sack on the counter and reached into his pocket for coins. Behind him, the door creaked open. Boots scraped on the wooden floor. Voices murmured and fell silent. He did not turn around. That'll be 70 cents, Mr. Cade. Silas counted out the coins and slid them across the counter. The storekeeper, a thin man named Wilkins, with spectacles that sat crooked on his nose, swept them into the till and pushed the flour toward him. Anything else today? Salt, 2 pounds. Wilkins turned to the shelf behind him. Silas waited, his hands flat on the counter, feeling the grain of the wood beneath his palms. The murmuring started again. Low, careful. The kind of talk that stopped when you looked directly at it. Silas kept his eyes forward. Wilkins set the salt beside the flour. 30 cents more. Silas paid, gathered his supplies, turned toward the door. Emmett Harlan stood in his path. The old man was built like a barrel, thick through the chest and shoulders, his beard stained yellow with tobacco juice. He had ranched the valley for 40 years and considered himself the moral compass of the county. Cade! Silas stopped. Harlan. The old man did not move aside. His eyes were small and hard, set deep in a face weathered by decades of sun and wind. That Hope woman's been out your way. It was not a question. Silas shifted the flour sack to his other arm. She has. 4 times this month. Folks are starting to wonder. Behind Harlan, 3 other men stood near the pickle barrel. Silas recognized them ranchers from the surrounding spreads, men he had nodded to at auctions and passed on the road without speaking. They were watching now, all of them. Folks can wonder all they want. Harlan's jaw tightened. A woman like that deserves better than a man who's gonna break her. The words landed like a slap. Silas felt his shoulders stiffen, felt the old familiar heat rise in his chest. He held it down. Then it's a good thing she's not asking your opinion. He stepped around Harlan and walked toward the door. The floorboards creaked under his boots. The murmuring rose again behind him. Louder now, no longer bothering to hide. She's making a fool of herself. Cade. Silas stopped with his hand on the door. Chasing after a man who can't love nothing. Whole county knows it. You're empty inside. And you're going to empty her out too if she lets you. The heat in his chest spread to his hands. His fingers tightened on the flour sack. He should turn around. Should say something. Should he push through the door and walked into the street? The sun hit him hard, bright and merciless. He crossed to where Dust stood tied at the rail, loaded his supplies into the saddlebag, and mounted in one smooth motion. He did not look back at the store. The road home stretched east, pale and empty. Silas let Dust walk, her hooves raising small puffs of dust that drifted and settled in the still air. Harlan's words played in his head, over and over, like a song he could not shake. Empty inside. Gonna break her. Can't love nothing. He thought of Clara's hands on the fence posts, her voice in the afternoon quiet, the way she had looked at him when she spoke of her brother, her eyes steady and unafraid. She had come to his place 4 times, had worked beside him without asking for anything in return, had shared pieces of herself that she did not have to share. And he had let her. That was the problem. He had let her in, just a little, just enough to feel something other than the cold emptiness he had carried for 8 years. And now the town was watching, talking, judging. They would break her down with their whispers, their sideways looks, their righteous concern for a woman who did not need their protection, unless he stopped it first. The cabin came into view over the rise. Silas reined Dust to a halt and sat in the saddle, staring at the place he had built with his own hands. 1 chair on the porch, 1 cup by the stove, 1 plate drying by the basin. That was how it should be, how it had to be. He could not give Clara what she deserved, could not be the man the town wanted him to be, could not carry the weight of another person's hopes when he could barely carry his own. The kindest thing he could do was send her away, before she got any closer, before the whispers became shouts, before he did something unforgivable, like letting himself believe that the emptiness inside him could ever be filled. Silas nudged Dust forward and rode down to the cabin. He unsaddled the mare, put away his supplies, sat on the porch as the sun dropped toward the hills and the shadows stretched long across the yard. The boot prints were still there in the dirt by his door. 2 sets now. His and hers, overlapping, pressed into the earth like a record of something that should not have been. He stared at them until the light failed. Tomorrow, Clara would come to finish the fence, and he would have to tell her not to come back. Clara's wagon appeared over the rise at mid-morning, the mare's braided mane catching the light. Silas stood at the gate, his hands at his sides. Watching her come, he had not slept, had sat on the porch through the dark hours, rehearsing the words he would say. They had seemed right in the darkness, necessary, kind, even. Now, in the hard light of day, they sat in his throat like stones. Clara reined the mare to a stop at the fence. She held a jar in her hands, the glass catching the sun, the contents amber and thick. Peach preserves, my mother's recipe. Silas did not move from the gate, did not open it. Clara's smile faded. She looked at him, really looked, and something shifted in her face. Silas, he forced the words out. This needs to stop. The jar went still in her hands. What needs to stop? This. He gestured at the space between them, at the wagon. at the preserves she had brought. "You coming here? The fence, the coffee, all of it?" Clara set the jar on the wagon seat. Her movements were slow, careful, like someone approaching a spooked horse. "Why?" He could not look at her, fixed his eyes on the fence post instead, on the grain of the wood, on anything but her face. "Because I'm not—" The words caught. He swallowed. "I can't be what you're looking for." "I wasn't looking for anything, Silas." Her voice was quiet, steady. It made everything worse. "I was just showing up." The gate stood between them, weathered and solid. Silas gripped the top rail, felt the splinters press into his palm. "The town's talking. Let them talk. They're saying things about you, about us." Clara climbed down from the wagon. Her boots raised small clouds of dust as she walked to the fence. She stopped 3 feet from where he stood, close enough that he could see the pulse beating in her throat. "I've heard what they're saying. I've been hearing it for 2 years, ever since I took over the auction and didn't have the good sense to sell it to a man." Her chin lifted. "Words don't scare me, Silas." "They should. Why?" He looked at her then, forced himself to meet her eyes. "Because they're right." Clara went still. "Harlan said I'm empty inside, that I'm going to break you." Silas's voice came out flat. "Dead. He's right. I've got nothing left to give. Everything I had. I buried under that oak tree 8 years ago." The words hung in the air. Ugly. True. Clara's face did not change. She did not flinch. Did not look away. Did not offer the soft denials he half expected. "Is that what you believe?" "It's what I know." She was quiet for a long moment. The mare stamped and shifted in the traces. A crow called from somewhere in the pasture. "Then I'll go." She turned and walked back to the wagon, climbed onto the seat, gathered the reins. Silas should have felt relief. This was what he wanted. What he needed. The clean break that would protect them both. Instead, he felt like he was watching himself from a great distance, watching a man destroy the only good thing that had happened to him in 8 years. Clara looked at him one last time. "I have one question, Silas. Just one." He waited. "Is this what you want? Or is this what you think you deserve?" The question hit him like a fist to the chest. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Clara nodded slowly. "That's what I thought." She clicked her tongue, and the mare moved forward. The wagon creaked, past the gate, past the fence line, down the road toward town. Silas stood frozen, his hands still gripping the gate, watching her go. The jar of preserves sat on the fence post where she had set it. Amber and gold in the morning light. Her mother's recipe. He did not touch it. The wagon grew smaller. The dust settled. The road went empty and quiet. Silas turned and walked back to the cabin. His boots felt heavy, his legs wooden. He climbed the porch steps and stood in the doorway, looking at the single room that had been his whole world for 8 years. 1 plate, 1 cup, 1 chair. This was what he wanted, what he had chosen. He went inside and closed the door. The days blurred together. He rose with the sun, worked until dark, fell into bed exhausted. The fence stood half-finished, the wire coiled and waiting, the posts stacked by the barn. He did not touch them. On the 3rd day, he ran out of coffee. On the 4th, he realized he had not eaten since morning. On the 5th, he stood at the window and watched the road until his eyes burned. She did not come. The 6th day brought rain. Silas walked out to check the livestock and slipped in the mud by the barn door. He went down hard, his knee striking a rock, his hands sinking into the cold black muck. He tried to rise and slipped again, landing on his side, the mud soaking through his shirt, his trousers, filling his boots. He lay there. The rain fell on his face. The mud sucked at his clothes. He could feel it seeping into him, cold and heavy, pulling him down. He should get up, should go inside. He did not move. The sky was gray and endless above him. The rain kept falling. And Silas Cade, who had survived the fever and the grief and 8 years of silence, lay in the mud behind his barn and felt something crack open inside his chest. Not his heart. He had thought that was already broken. Something deeper. Something he had walled away so long ago he had forgotten it was there. He closed his eyes and let the rain wash over him. When he finally rose, his body was shaking. His knee throbbed. His hands were black with mud. His clothes ruined. His boots squelching with every step. He limped to the cabin and stood dripping on the threshold, looking at the jar of preserves still sitting on the fence post where Clara had left it. 7 days. The rain had spotted the glass, but it was still there, waiting. He walked to the fence, picked up the jar, carried it inside. The wax seal broke with a soft pop. The smell hit him, peaches and sugar and summer, and something else, something that made his throat close up. He ate standing at the window, watching the empty road. The preserves thick and sweet on his tongue. His hands were still caked with mud. His clothes dripped onto the floor. He did not care. Halfway through the jar, he stopped, set the spoon down, looked at his reflection in the dark window, a muddy, broken man eating another woman's preserves in an empty cabin. Alone. This was what he had chosen. This was what he deserved. Wasn't it Clara's voice echoed in his head? That question, that terrible question. Is this what you want? Or is this what you think you deserve? Silas stared at his reflection, at the mud on his face, at the emptiness in his eyes, and for the first time in 8 years, he did not know the answer. The razor nicked his jaw, and Silas watched the blood well up in the small mirror above the basin. He did not wipe it away, just stared at the face looking back at him, the hollow cheeks, the shadows beneath his eyes, the lines carved deep by years of silence. He had not shaved in 2 weeks, had not put on his good shirt since the day Clara left. He dipped the razor in the water and finished the job. The blood dried to a thin line on his jaw. He left it there, put on the shirt with the mother-of-pearl buttons, the one his wife had made for him, the one he had not worn since the funeral. The fabric was stiff, the collar tight against his throat. He had started sketching the chair that night, the night he lay in the mud, the night something cracked open inside him and would not close again. Oak, from the tree on the ridge, the same tree that shaded the graves. He had worked on it every night since, by lamplight, his hands moving even when his mind told him to stop, cutting, shaping, sanding, building something he had no right to build, for someone who might never sit in it. The chair stood finished now, beside the door, waiting. Silas saddled dust in the gray light before dawn and rode toward town. The auction yard was already filling when he arrived. Ranchers milled near the holding pens, their voices low, their breath fogging in the cool morning air. Silas tied dust to the rail inside the yard this time, not at the fence, and walked through the crowd. People stared. He felt their eyes on his back, heard the murmurs rise and fall like wind through dry grass. He did not stop. The platform stood at the far end of the yard, wooden and weathered, the same platform where Clara's father had called prices for 30 years. Clara stood behind the podium, her ledger open, her gavel in her hand. She saw him coming. Her face went still. The gavel hovered in the air, frozen mid-motion. Silas walked through the crowd. Men stepped aside, their conversations dying. A woman clutched her husband's arm. Somewhere, a child asked a question and was quickly hushed. He stopped at the base of the platform. Clara looked down at him. Her eyes were guarded, her jaw tight. She did not speak. Silas took off his hat. The yard went quiet. Even the cattle seemed to still, their lowing fading to silence. "Miss Hope." His voice carried in the sudden hush, rough, uncertain, but clear. Clara lowered the gavel. "Mr. Cade? You asked me once what I was running from." She waited. The crowd waited. The whole world seemed to hold its breath. Silas turned the hat in his hands. The brim was worn smooth from years of handling, the felt soft and familiar against his fingers. "I didn't have an answer then. I do now." He looked up at her, met her eyes. "I was running from the same thing for 8 years. Thought if I kept moving, it couldn't catch me. Thought if I stayed empty, nothing could hurt me again." His voice cracked. He steadied it. "I was wrong." Clara's expression did not change. But something shifted in her stance, a loosening, a leaning forward, so slight that only someone watching closely would notice. Silas was watching closely. The thing I was running from it was already there. Every morning when I woke up, every night when I closed my eyes. It wasn't the grief. It wasn't the loss. He swallowed hard. It was the fear. Fear that if I let anyone close, I'd lose them too. Fear that I didn't deserve to be anything but alone. The crowd pressed in around him. He could feel their judgment, their curiosity, their hunger for spectacle. He ignored them all. "You asked if I wanted to stop running." Clara's hand tightened on the gavel. Her knuckles went white. "I'm answering now." Silas stepped closer to the platform, close enough to see the pulse jumping in her throat, the slight tremor in her fingers. "I want to stop, Clara. I'm tired of running. I'm tired of empty chairs and cold coffee and silence that sounds like dying." He put his hat back on, took a breath. "I'm not asking you to save me. I know a man's got to save himself, or the saving doesn't stick. But I built something. A chair. Oak. From the tree on the ridge." His voice dropped. "I'm hoping you'll let me put it on your porch. I'm hoping you'll let me sit in it sometimes. I'm hoping—" He stopped. The words had run out. Clara looked at him for a long moment. Her face was unreadable, her body still. Then she set down the gavel. "My porch already has 2 chairs. Mr. Cade." Silas felt something sink in his chest. Clara stepped to the edge of the platform and looked down at him. "But yours only has 1. She held his gaze. "Bring that chair to your place. I'll come see it Sunday." Something broke loose in his chest, something that had been locked tight for 8 years, buried under grief and fear and the terrible weight of being alone. Sunday. Clara almost smiled. The corners of her mouth twitched, fought, surrendered. "Bring an appetite. I'll bring supper." The crowd erupted. Voices rose. Laughter spilled. Someone slapped Silas on the back hard enough to make him stumble. He barely noticed. He was looking at Clara. Only Clara. She picked up her gavel and turned back to the crowd. "All right, folks. Show's over. We've got cattle to sell." The auction resumed. The noise swelled. The world started turning again. Silas walked back through the crowd, his hat low, his heart hammering against his ribs. Men nodded as he passed. A few spoke words he did not quite hear, would not remember later. He untied dust and swung into the saddle. The road home stretched east, pale and familiar. But it looked different now. Wider, brighter, full of something he had almost forgotten existed. He touched his heels to Dust's flanks and rode out of the yard. Halfway home, he stopped at the ridge and looked back toward town. The auction yard was a distant smudge. The sound of voices carried faint on the wind. Clara was still there, calling prices, running the gavel, doing the work her father had left her. Sunday was 6 days away. Silas turned dust toward home and thought about where to put the chair. On the porch, beside his own, close enough to talk without raising voices, close enough to stay. The oak was good wood, dense and heavy, the grain running straight and true. Silas had already shaped it, already sanded it smooth, already fitted the joints with the care his father had taught him. Now he ran his hand along the armrest one final time, feeling for any roughness he might have missed. There was none. He carried the chair to the porch and set it beside his own. The new oak was lighter than the weathered pine of his seat. The wood still fresh and unmarked. It would darken with time, would take on the oils of hands and the wear of years, would become part of the porch, part of the cabin, part of whatever came next. 2 chairs now, side by side, close enough to talk without raising voices, far enough apart to breathe. Silas stood back and looked at them. His throat felt tight. Sunday had come. He went inside and pumped water into the basin, shaved carefully, watching his face in the small mirror, making sure the blade did not slip. Put on the shirt with the mother-of-pearl buttons washed now, pressed with a hot iron, the collar soft against his neck. He swept the cabin floor, wiped down the table, set 2 plates, 2 cups, 2 forks. The second set had belonged to his wife. He had not touched them in 8 years. His hands trembled as he laid them out, but he did not stop. The stew had been simmering since the night before, beef and potatoes and carrots from the garden, seasoned with salt and the wild sage that grew near the creek. He checked it once, twice, adjusted the fire, tasted the broth. It was ready. He was not sure he would ever be ready. The afternoon stretched long and slow. Silas sat on the porch and watched the road. The new chair stood empty beside him, its wood catching the light, its seat smooth and waiting. He heard her before he saw her, the creak of wagon wheels, the steady clop of hooves on packed earth. His hands tightened on the armrests of his chair. Clara's wagon appeared over the rise. The bay mare walked easily, her head nodding with each step. Clara sat straight on the seat, a basket covered with checkered cloth beside her. She reined the mare to a stop at the gate. Silas stood, walked down the porch steps, crossed the yard to where she waited. "Miss Hope! Mr. Cade!" They looked at each other. The wind stirred the dust at their feet. "I brought bread," Clara said, "and apple butter, my mother's recipe. I made stew." She climbed down from the wagon, and he took the mare's bridle, leading her to the water trough. The animal drank deep, her sides heaving, her coat warm from the road. Clara carried the basket to the porch. She stopped when she saw the chairs. Oak. From the tree on the ridge. She set the basket down and ran her hand along the armrest. Her fingers traced the grain, the curves, the smooth places where he had sanded away every roughness. The one by the graves. Silas nodded. Seemed right. "They would have liked you." Clara was quiet for a moment. Her hand rested on the chair, still and steady. "I would have liked them too." They ate inside, at the table set for 2. The stew was good, better than he remembered. Or maybe it was just that food tasted different when someone else was there to share it. Clara's bread was dense and warm, the apple butter sweet and sharp on his tongue. They talked about small things, the price of feed, a difficult mare at the auction, the rain that had come and gone. Words that filled the spaces silence had held for so long. After supper, they moved to the porch. Clara sat in the new chair without asking. It fit her, the height, the width, the angle of the back. Silas had not planned it that way, but somehow the chair had known. He poured coffee into 2 cups and handed one to her. She wrapped her hands around it, the steam rising between her fingers. The sun dropped toward the hills. The light went gold, then amber, then the color of old honey. My daughter used to catch fireflies. The words came out before he could stop them. He had not spoken of her in years, not to anyone, not even to himself in the quiet of his own mind. Clara turned to look at him, waited. She had a jar, a little one, with holes punched in the lid. She would run through the meadow at dusk, catching them one by one, holding the jar up to watch them glow. He stared at the hills. His throat felt tight. She said they were stars that fell to earth, stars that got lost and needed help finding their way home. Clara did not speak, did not offer comfort or platitudes. She simply listened, her hands still on the cup, her eyes on his face. I have not thought about that in a long time. Thank you for telling me. The light faded. The first stars appeared faint points of silver in the deepening blue. Clara set down her cup. My brother used to whittle little animals, mostly horses and dogs, and once a rabbit that looked more like a pig. Silas felt his mouth twitch. He gave me one the week before he died, a bird. He said it was a meadowlark, but the wings were crooked and the beak was too long. She paused. I still have it. Keep it on my windowsill. He sounds like a good man. He was. They sat in the quiet, watching the stars multiply. Somewhere in the meadow, the fireflies began to rise, small flickers of gold in the darkness, drifting upward like sparks from a fire that gave no heat. Silas stood. I will be right back. He went inside. The cabin was dark, the stove cold, the single room somehow larger than it had ever been. He crossed to the shelf by the window. The coal oil lamp sat there, its chimney clean, its wick trimmed, waiting. He struck a match, touched it to the wick. The flame caught, steadied, grew. He carried the lamp to the window and set it on the sill, where it could be seen from the road, where it could guide someone home, if they were looking. Then he walked back outside. Clara was watching the fireflies, her face soft in the gathering dark. She turned when she heard him, and her eyes went to the window. The lamp glowed there, warm and steady, casting a rectangle of gold across the porch. About time, she said. Silas sat down in his chair, picked up his cup, looked at the woman beside him, at the fireflies rising from the meadow, at the two graves under the oak tree where wildflowers grew in the starlight. About time, he agreed. They sat together as the night deepened, the lamp burning in the window, the chairs side by side, the silence between them no longer empty but full of everything they had lost and everything they might still find. The fireflies drifted higher, the stars grew brighter, and somewhere in the distance, a whippoorwill began to sing. Clara reached over and rested her hand on the armrest of his chair, not touching him, just close, just there. Silas looked at her hand, at his own, inches away. He did not move, not yet, but he did not pull away either, and that, he thought, was enough. For now, that was enough. There is a certain weight that comes after a story like this one, not sadness, exactly. Something quieter, something that settles in the chest and asks nothing of us except to be felt. Many of us know what it is to build walls, to convince ourselves that distance keeps us safe, to push away the very thing we need most because staying feels more dangerous than leaving ever could. Some of us have stood at gates we were afraid to open. Some of us have sent people away and then watched the road, hoping they might return. Some of us are still watching. Perhaps you have known the particular silence of a house with only one chair. Perhaps you have eaten a meal alone and wondered if this is how it will always be. Perhaps you have carried something heavy for so long that you have forgotten what it felt like to set it down. It is all right if this story stirred something that does not have a name. Not everything needs to be understood. Not every ache needs to be fixed. Sometimes a feeling just needs room to breathe. And then, in its own time, it finds its place. The empty chairs and the full ones. The doors we open and the ones we keep closed. They are ours to tend in whatever way feels true. Thank you for staying until the lamp was lit. Thank you for listening.